What if the reason you keep starting over isn't lack of talent, but the fact that you keep talking about the change before the change has a chance to become real? Because there's a specific kind of pain that doesn't get discussed enough. It's the pain of having a serious intention, something you actually want to build, and watching it die slowly, not because the goal was impossible, but because the world got access to it too early. You told someone, you posted it, you hinted at it, you let it become a conversation, and the moment it became a conversation, it stopped being sacred. Suddenly, it had opinions, reactions, expectations, doubt, pressure, questions you didn't ask for, energy you didn't want to manage, and without realizing it, you traded the quiet strength of building for the noisy comfort of being seen trying to build. That trade feels harmless at first. It even feels motivating, but it's a trap. Your brain loves applause because applause feels like progress. A message like, "proud of you," gives you a hit of relief, almost like you already did the work. And then the next morning comes, no cheering, no audience, no dopamine, and the real work asks you to show up anyway. That's where most people lose. Not because they're weak, because they trained themselves to associate change with visibility, not repetition. Stoicism has this cold, clean reminder that cuts through the noise. Your life is shaped by what you can control. Your choices, your habits, your discipline, not by the mood of the room. Marcus Aurelius wrote something close to this idea when he warned how easily the mind gets pulled outward, how quickly we start living for other people's attention instead of our own standards. And if you're honest, you already know what that feels like. You sit down to work and your mind drifts to how it will look. You start a routine and immediately wonder if anyone will notice. You make a decision and feel the urge to explain it, to justify it, to make sure nobody misunderstands. Even your silence starts to feel like something you owe an explanation for. But the strongest transformations don't begin with explanation. They begin with protection. There's a season in every real comeback where you need privacy the way a flame needs shelter from wind. Early growth is fragile. Not fragile because you're incapable, but because you're still becoming the person who can hold the new standard without negotiating with yourself. And if you expose that process too soon, you invite the very thing that kills it: performance. You start acting like the goal is already part of your identity, and that identity feeling replaces the hard, boring, invisible repetition that would have made it true, becomes a brand. And then the quiet daily becomes a brand. And then the quiet daily work feels too small compared to the image they just created, so they quit, or they stall, or they keep preparing, while their future stays parked in the same place. So this episode is for the person who's done performing progress. For the person who's tired of announcing, tired of explaining, tired of being inspired in public and inconsistent in private. For the person who wants a different kind of power, self-trust. The kind that comes from keeping promises to yourself when nobody is watching, when nobody is clapping, when the only reward is the quiet fact that you didn't abandon yourself today. If you've been in a season where it looks like nothing is happening, I want you to consider the possibility that something important is happening. You're preparing under the surface. Roots are forming. Standards are shifting. A new identity is being rehearsed privately before it ever tries to stand in public. And that's not stagnation. That's controlled preparation. That's you refusing to let your image grow faster than your substance. If this is the kind of mindset you want more of, calm, practical, and built for real change, subscribe to the channel. And now, let's start with the first truth, the foundation of all of it. Silence is where real self-construction begins. It starts as something small and almost invisible. You stop talking as much. Not because you're trying to appear mysterious, not because you're playing a game, but because you're finally tired of hearing yourself promise things you haven't built yet. You're tired of turning your future into a conversation. You're tired of giving people access to something that's still forming. And that's the moment the real work can finally begin. You catch the patterns that usually hide you. Catch the patterns that usually hide behind noise. The excuses you repeat, the distractions you reach for, the emotional habits that pull you off track. When everything is loud, you can pretend you're progressing just because you feel busy. But when it gets quiet, you're forced to face the only question that matters. Who are you becoming when nobody is impressed? Most people never meet themselves in that way. They stay surrounded by stimulation, by opinions, by constant updates, so they don't have to sit with the uncomfortable gap between who they say they are and what their daily actions prove. Silence removes the stage. It removes the audience. And without the audience, something honest appears. Your standards. That's why the deepest changes often begin during a quiet season where nobody notices. From the outside, it can look like you disappeared. Less posting, less explaining, less reacting. But inside, a different life is being constructed. You're rebuilding your habits, your sleep, your discipline, your boundaries, your relationship with your own mind. And those changes don't announce themselves at first. They don't show up as dramatic results. They show up as smaller victories, like not needing to be seen to stay consistent. Think about any real transformation you've ever respected. The athlete who looks unstoppable on game day didn't become that person in the stadium. They became that person in a room with no cameras, repeating the same movement until it stopped being effort and became identity. The writer who drops a powerful book didn't create it by talking about it daily. They created it by sitting alone with resistance and still writing. Even the calmest person you've met, the one who doesn't get easily shaken, usually earned that calm in private through years of learning how to regulate their own inner weather. Stoicism has always respected this kind of quiet, not as a performance of being unbothered, but as a commitment to mastery. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, but so much of what made him strong wasn't public authority. It was private discipline. He wrote to himself, not to the world. He didn't need an audience to practice virtue. That's the point. The strongest kind of construction happens when you're no longer trying to prove you're changing. You're just changing. Silence also protects your focus from a specific poison, premature identity. The moment you announce a goal, you can start enjoying the feeling of being that person before you've done the work. You get treated like you're already disciplined, already serious, already committed, so your brain gets a reward early. And early rewards are dangerous because they soften urgency. They make the boring work feel optional. Silence takes away that shortcut. It forces your identity to be earned the slow way, through repetition. And there's another reason silence matters. It gives your new self room to breathe before it's judged. In the early stages, you're inconsistent. You're learning. You're still fragile in the sense that one sarcastic comment can make you question everything. One friend's doubt can infect your confidence. One person's opinion can push you into explaining, proving, defending, until your attention is gone. Silence blocks that. It keeps your energy from leaking into conversations that don't build your future. It keeps your process clean. So the move here isn't to become secretive. The move is to become sacred, to treat your rebuilding like something you don't throw into the open too soon, to let the work mature before it meets the world. Show up on days you didn't want to, show up on days you didn't want to, on days nobody knew, on days there was no reward except self-respect. That kind of trust is rare, and once you have it, you stop needing noise to feel alive. You stop needing attention to stay committed. You become steady, so let the silence be real. Let it be your training ground. Let it be the place where you build the kind of life that doesn't need constant explanation. And here's a question to sit with before we move on. If nobody could see what you're working on for the next 6 months, what would you finally have the courage to build? Your unfinished self needs protection, not exposure. There's a stage of growth that almost nobody respects because it doesn't look impressive yet. It looks messy. It looks inconsistent. It looks like you're still figuring it out. And that's exactly why it needs protection. New version of you is real enough to feel new version of you is real enough to feel exciting, but not stable enough to survive noise. That's the phase where one comment can get under your skin, where one person's doubt can feel heavier than your own intention, where praise can inflate you too early and criticism can make you question everything. The goal isn't to hide because you're ashamed. The goal is to shelter what's still forming. Think about it like this. When something is unfinished, it's more sensitive to temperature. A seed doesn't grow better because you keep digging it up to check progress. It grows because it's left alone long enough to do what it's meant to do. A new habit works the same way. If you expose it too soon, you invite interference. People's opinions, their curiosity, their expectations, their jokes, their projections. And even when they mean well, their attention adds weight. Weight you didn't ask for. Weight you can't carry yet. This is why early growth collapses so often. Not because the person wasn't serious, but because the goal became public before it became rooted. Once it's public, you start living with a second job, managing perception. You start thinking about how you look while you're improving, instead of focusing on improving. You start explaining why you're doing it. You start updating people. You start defending yourself when they don't get it. Your mind gets split between the work and the commentary around the work, and commentary is exhausting. The funny thing is, even support can be a trap at this stage. Support can turn into pressure. It can turn into a performance. People ask, "How's it going?" And suddenly you feel like you owe progress. You feel like you owe results. You feel like you owe proof that you weren't just talking. And if you hit a slow week, which is normal, you feel embarrassed. You start avoiding the work because now the work has an audience attached to it. You're no longer building for yourself. You're building for the feeling of not disappointing them. That's how exposure kills the unfinished version of you. It turns growth into a social experience instead of a private commitment. Epictetus had a calm way of saying something like this: "No great thing is created suddenly." That line matters because it removes the fantasy of instant transformation. It reminds you that becoming someone new has stages, and early stages don't need publicity. They need repetition. They need quiet. They need room to be ugly without being judged, room to be slow without being mocked, room to be inconsistent without being labeled a failure. And the world is not good at giving you that room. The world loves the finished product, the glow-up, the before and after, the comeback story once it's already safe to applaud. But the world has no patience for the in-between. The in-between looks boring. It looks uncertain. It looks like nothing. So if you invite the world in too early, you're asking people to respect something they don't know how to respect, and you end up carrying their impatience on your back. That's why protection isn't weakness, it's strategy. Protection means you choose a small circle, or no circle, for certain goals. It means you stop explaining your focus. It means you let people misunderstand your silence while you keep working. It means you give your future a chance to grow without being touched. Not because you're trying to surprise anyone, but because you're trying to succeed. Because you know how you are. You know what gets in your head. You know what drains your energy. You know what makes you start performing instead of building. So you make it clean. You don't announce the new routine while it's still fragile. You don't share the plan while you're still learning to execute it. You don't debate your boundaries while you're still practicing them. You don't talk your way into confidence. You earn it quietly by doing the thing again and again until it becomes normal. And this is where self-trust starts to return. Not the fake confidence that comes from excitement, but the stable kind that comes from evidence. You keep a promise to yourself, alone. Then you keep another one. Nobody knows. Nobody claps. But you do. And your nervous system starts to relax. Because for once, your identity isn't built on what you say. It's built on what you repeat. That's the deeper reason your unfinished self needs protection. You're not just building a result. You're building a relationship with yourself, and relationships don't grow well under constant public observation. They grow through consistency, privacy, and trust. So if you're in a quiet season, don't rush to make it visible. Don't rush to make it real to others. Let it become real to you first. Let it become rooted. Let it become stable. Because once it's stable, it won't need protection anymore. It will stand on its own. Not every goal survives public attention. You turn that contract into a public. You turn that contract into a public announcement. You introduce forces that don't care about your future. Opinions, expectations, comparisons, ego, and the subtle pressure to perform the identity before you've built the habits that make it real. It's strange, but saying a goal out loud can sometimes feel like progress. You tell a friend you're getting in shape. You hint that you're starting a business. You post that you're locked in. People react. They support. They joke. They ask questions. They watch. And your brain for a second feels rewarded, almost like the change already happened. You get a hit of social dopamine. You feel seen. You feel like the new version of you has already arrived, but the work hasn't started yet. Not in the only place that matters, the repetition. That's why public attention can be a quiet killer. It gives you an early reward, and early rewards are dangerous because they reduce hunger. They make you feel like you're already becoming the person before you've earned that identity in private. Then real life shows up the next morning. You wake up tired. You don't feel inspired. The plan feels heavy. The excitement is gone. And now there's another weight on top of the work, the awareness that people know, that they might ask, that they might notice if you fall off, that you might look inconsistent. So instead of simply returning to the routine like a normal human being, you start managing an image. You start negotiating with embarrassment. You start trying to keep up the story you told, and the story becomes more important than the process. Even encouragement can become pressure. Someone says, "You've got this," and suddenly you feel like you have to prove you've got it. Someone checks in, and your mind goes to performance. You want to report progress, not reality. You feel tempted to exaggerate or to avoid the conversation entirely because you don't want to look like you're failing. And that's how a simple goal turns into a social stressor. But there's a deeper issue hiding under all of this. Public attention invites other people into a process they can't feel from the inside. They don't know your resistance. They don't know your fatigue. They don't know the private battles you're fighting just to show up. They only see outcomes, and their reactions will always be based on the surface. That means your motivation becomes unstable. One person's praise can inflate you. One person's doubt can deflate you. One person's sarcasm can make you want to prove yourself. One person's silence can make you wonder if you're still worth watching. And you end up doing the worst trade possible. You trade calm consistency for emotional noise. Stoicism has a simple way of cutting through this. It doesn't ask you to hate people or distrust everyone. It asks you to protect what is in your control. Your effort is in your control. Your choices are in your control. Your discipline is in your control. Other people's reactions are not. So if you tie your goal to their reactions, you've placed something sacred on unstable ground. There's a line often attributed to Epictetus that captures the spirit perfectly. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. The point isn't to be mysterious. The point is to keep the work pure, to let the goal stay connected to your standards, not to the room's response. Weeks where you show up badly, and still weeks where you show up badly, and still show up. They need quiet, so you can build without self-consciousness, without the temptation to look like you're progressing instead of actually progressing. And maybe that's the real test. Can you keep going when nobody knows? Can you train when nobody praises you? Can you build when nobody asks? Can you stay loyal to the future you want, even if it stays invisible for a while? The irony is that the goals that survive private seasons tend to explode later in the most satisfying way, not because you announced them, but because they matured. They became real, they gained weight, they earned structure. And when something is real, it doesn't need you to convince anyone. It introduces itself. So be careful what you expose too early, not because people are evil, but because attention changes the atmosphere around your work. And some ambitions need clean air. If you stop talking about your next move for a while, what goal would finally have the space to survive? Private discipline is stronger than public motivation. Motivation is loud. It announces itself. It wants a clean start date, a perfect mood, a playlist that hits, a moment that feels symbolic. Motivation loves the idea of being the kind of person who changes, and it usually comes with a story you can tell about yourself. That's why it feels so good in the beginning. You don't even need results yet. You just need the feeling that you're on your way. But discipline doesn't feel like that. Again, in ordinary time, when nobody is again, in ordinary time, when nobody is watching, when the work looks boring, when the results are still invisible, when your mind is trying to convince you that tomorrow will be easier. And that's why discipline wins, because motivation is tied to emotion, and emotion changes. You can wake up motivated on Monday and empty on Tuesday. You can feel unstoppable in the morning and heavy by night. You can watch one video and feel ready to conquer life, then get one stressful message and forget everything you promised yourself. Motivation is fragile because it depends on internal weather. Discipline is stronger because it's built like a contract. You do the thing not because you feel like it, but because you decided. And the moment you cross that line, where action is no longer waiting for mood, you stop being a person who tries. You become a person who moves. That's a different identity. And it matters because most people don't actually fail due to lack of knowledge. They fail because their behavior is powered by feeling. When the feeling isn't there, the habit collapses. So they spend their life chasing the feeling again. Another burst of inspiration, another speech, another plan, another this time for real. It becomes a loop, hype, crash, guilt, restart. Private discipline breaks the loop because it replaces hype with repetition. You see it in every domain that produces real results. The person who's in shape isn't motivated every day. They're trained. Their body knows the routine. Their mind knows the standard. They don't need a dramatic emotional push to go train, because training is no longer a debate. It's just what happens. The same is true for work. The creator who produces consistently isn't always inspired. They're organized. They built a structure strong enough to function even when emotion is low. This is why private discipline is more powerful than public motivation. It doesn't need witnesses. Public motivation tends to drift toward performance. You start to like the image of being disciplined. You start to enjoy the identity. People reflect back to you, and without meaning to, you begin to work for the reaction. You post the grind. You hint at the comeback. You let the goal become part of how people see you. Then the pressure builds, and the work becomes complicated. Because now you're not only lifting the weight of the habit, you're also lifting the weight of perception. Private discipline stays clean. Nobody claps, so you can't confuse applause with progress. Nobody knows, so you can't hide behind talk. Nobody's watching, so you're forced to answer the only honest question. Do you want the result, or do you want the appearance of ambition? That question hurts. And it also frees you, because when nobody is watching, excuses stop working. You can't blame someone else's opinion. You can't blame misunderstanding. You can't blame the room. You're alone with your standard. And in that solitude, you build something attention can never give you: self-trust. Self-trust is the quiet confidence that comes from evidence. It comes from doing what you said you'd do, especially when you didn't feel like it. It comes from showing yourself that your word means something, not to the world, to you. Marcus Aurelius captured this spirit with a simple reminder: you have power over your mind, not outside events. It's not a quote about denial. It's a quote about ownership. Your routine is where ownership becomes real. Not in what you promise, not in what you post, in what you repeat. And once discipline becomes your core, you stop needing motivational spikes to survive. You don't need a perfect week to feel confident. You don't need approval to feel stable. You stop being a person who is constantly starting, and you become a person who is continuing. That's the real flex, continuing. So if you've been waiting for motivation, consider this. Motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a home. One shows up when it wants. The other is built by you, quietly, brick by brick, until it's strong enough to hold you on the days you don't feel strong. And here's the question I want you to sit with. If nobody could ever see your effort, not online, not in your circle, not even in your future story, would you still do the work tomorrow? The new you must be practiced in secret before it appears in public. Because identity isn't something you announce. It's something your nervous system learns. And your nervous system doesn't learn from speeches. It learns from repetition. Quiet repetition. The kind that happens when there's no audience to impress and no reputation to protect. Most people try to change publicly first. They change their language. They change their captions. They change the way they talk about themselves. They start using the vocabulary of discipline, the vocabulary of growth, the vocabulary of control. And for a moment it feels real, because words can create a temporary identity, like a costume you put on and start believing in. But the problem with public identity is that it's too easy to borrow it before you earn it. You can call yourself focused while your habits stay scattered. You can say you're building while your days are still leaking into distractions. You can claim you're unbothered while your mood is still being pulled around by somebody's attention. That gap, the gap between the identity you present and the identity your actions support, creates pressure. And pressure tends to expose what's not trained yet. That's why the real move is private rehearsal. The new you needs practice the same way a new skill needs practice. Nobody becomes calm in public without first learning calm in private. Nobody becomes disciplined in public without first learning to show up alone. Nobody becomes emotionally independent in public without first surviving the quiet moments where they used to chase, explain, and beg for reassurance. Think about how most transformations actually happen. The person who finally becomes consistent with fitness doesn't wake up one day with a new personality. They start doing small workouts when no one is watching. They build tolerance for discomfort. They learn how to move on low motivation days. Their body starts trusting the routine. Their mind stops negotiating. Over time, the identity becomes natural, not because they declared it, but because they rehearsed it until it felt normal. The same is true for boundaries. In the beginning, boundaries feel awkward. You say no, and you immediately want to soften it, explain it, apologize for it, make sure the other person isn't upset. That reflex isn't a moral weakness, it's a habit. And habits don't break through insight alone, they break through practice. So you practice privately first. You rehearse the sentence. You sit with the discomfort. You let someone be disappointed without rushing to fix it. You do it again, then again. Eventually, the boundary stops feeling like a confrontation and starts feeling like your baseline. This is what people miss when they say, "I'm changing." They think change is a declaration. It isn't. Change is training. Epictetus said it with blunt simplicity. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. The second half of that sentence is where most lives are won or lost. Do what you have to do doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in the unglamorous hours. It happens when you're tired, when you're alone, when no one's checking in, when the old you feels easier. Wants proof that the struggle is worth it. It wants recognition. It wants proof that the struggle is worth it. And public attention gives that reward too early. It makes you feel accomplished before you're stable. Then, the first hard day shows up, and the identity you announced doesn't have legs yet. So it collapses, and you feel embarrassed, and you quit, not because you can't do it, but because you exposed it before it could stand. In private, you're allowed to be clumsy. You're allowed to be inconsistent at first. You're allowed to miss a day and come back without turning it into a shame story. You're allowed to practice the new self, the way you practice a language, slowly, imperfectly, repeatedly, until it becomes yours. And there's a deeper benefit that doesn't get talked about enough. Private practice makes your confidence clean. It's not borrowed from how people see you. It's earned from what you've done. That kind of confidence feels different. It's quieter. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't panic when misunderstood. It doesn't crumble when the room is cold because it wasn't built in the room. So if you're serious about becoming someone new, let that new version of you be small for a while. Let it be hidden. Let it be protected. Let it be rehearsed in silence. Give it time to become natural, not performative. Then let the public meet it later, when it's already real. Because the cleanest transformation is the one you don't have to explain. And here's the question that sharpens this point. If nobody could ever applaud your progress, what part of the new you would you still practice tonight, in private, just to keep your word to yourself? Stop broadcasting what should still be growing roots. Because there's a phase where a goal is alive, but it's not strong yet. It's like the first weeks of a new routine, when it feels promising, when you can finally imagine a different life, but one bad day can still knock it over. And in that phase, visibility isn't strength. Visibility is pressure. Needs depth, not attention. It needs depth, not attention. It needs repetition, not commentary. It needs a protected environment where the work can stay simple. The moment you start broadcasting, the environment changes. Now there's a mental audience following your progress. Now there's a part of you that wants to be consistent for appearance, not for identity. Now you're tempted to post the grind on the days you feel strong and disappear on the days you feel weak, which turns growth into a performance instead of a practice. And when growth becomes a performance, it becomes unstable, because performance depends on mood, on energy, on reactions. Practice depends on standard. Even if people support you, their attention adds weight. They ask questions you don't know how to answer yet. They offer advice you didn't request. They project their own fears onto your plan. They joke. They compare. They doubt. They praise. And all of it pulls your attention outward, away from the quiet work that actually builds the roots. You want someone to witness your decision. You want someone to witness your decision. But there's a difference between accountability and exposure. Accountability is a private agreement with someone you trust, someone who protects your process and keeps you grounded. Exposure is turning your unfinished work into public content, where anyone can touch it with an opinion. And opinions, even small ones, can poison early growth. Not because you're fragile as a person, but because the habit is still fragile. The identity is still new. You're still learning how to show up without arguing with yourself. You're still learning how to handle a hard day without letting it become a story. So when you invite noise too early, the noise doesn't just distract you, it shakes your commitment. It makes you overthink. It makes you second guess. It makes you explain. It makes you justify. It makes you care about being right instead of being consistent. This is why some goals die the moment they're announced. The goal itself wasn't weak. The roots were just shallow because they hadn't had time. Stoicism respects this kind of quiet building. It doesn't mean you never share anything. It means you understand timing. The Stoics weren't obsessed with being seen as disciplined. They were obsessed with actually being disciplined. And the work that makes you disciplined rarely looks exciting in the beginning. It looks like boring repetition. It looks like saying no and sitting with discomfort. It looks like showing up when you'd rather disappear. It looks like doing the smallest version of the habit on the worst day, just to keep the identity alive. That kind of work grows roots. And roots change you before results do. They change the way you wake up, the way you choose food, the way you handle emotion, the way you speak to yourself, the way you spend your time when nobody is watching. The world can't clap for that because it can't see it. But that's exactly why it's powerful. It's pure. It's not contaminated by performance. So if you're building something serious, protect it from the urge to narrate it. Let your progress be quiet for a while. Let the work become stable. Let the routine become normal. Let the new standard become your default. Then, when it finally shows up publicly, it won't need you to convince anyone. It'll feel obvious. Because roots don't need applause. They need time. And time needs silence. Talking about the move is often the first way people kill the move. Not always on purpose. Not always with malice. Sometimes it's a joke, a skeptical look, a be realistic, a well-meant warning. Sometimes it's the opposite. Too much praise too early, too much attention, too many questions, too many expectations wrapped around something that was supposed to stay simple. Either way, the result is the same. The moment your plan becomes a conversation, it stops being clean. A move is powerful when it's still yours, when it lives in that private space where you don't have to defend it, sell it, or explain it. The moment you start talking about it, you introduce an extra layer that has nothing to do with execution. Now there's perception. Now there's identity. Now there's a version of you that wants to sound confident, a version that wants to seem certain, a version that wants to look disciplined before discipline is stable. And that's where things quietly break. Because the truth is, most people don't respond to your future. They respond to their own interpretation of it. Their reaction isn't about your dream. It's about what your dream triggers in them. It might trigger doubt because they tried something similar and failed. It might trigger discomfort because your growth forces them to feel their stagnation. It might trigger jealousy because your movement makes them feel left behind. Or it might trigger excitement because they want to attach themselves to your momentum for a moment. None of that is your responsibility, but once you let the move become public, you start carrying all of it anyway. You can feel it happen in real time. You share the plan, and suddenly you're answering questions you didn't need to answer. You're explaining why it matters. You're justifying why now. You're trying to sound prepared so you don't look naive. You start editing your vision to make it more acceptable. You soften it so it won't threaten anyone. Or you inflate it so it sounds impressive. Either way, you're no longer building. You're managing a narrative. And narratives are heavy. They pull you out of the work and into the performance of the work. Even when someone is supportive, the conversation can still weaken the move. Their encouragement feels good, so your brain takes the reward early. You feel like you've already made progress because people see you as someone who's about to change. That feeling is addictive. It makes the next step, actually doing the boring work, feel less urgent. The hunger gets replaced by comfort. Then the first hard day comes, and the comfort is gone. Now you're left with the work and the pressure. And pressure is a strange thing. It doesn't always push you forward. Sometimes it freezes you. It makes you avoid the work, because failing publicly feels worse than failing privately. So you delay, you stall, you plan more. You wait until you're sure you can look consistent. That's how talking kills the move. It makes you afraid of being seen struggling. But struggle is the only path to results. This is why Stoicism, at its core, is not a philosophy of looking strong. It's a philosophy of being strong without needing witnesses. Marcus Aurelius wrote for himself, not for applause. He didn't need the world to validate his discipline in order to practice it. There's a line from Epictetus that cuts right through this temptation. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. In other words, don't turn your next step into a speech. Let your behavior speak in a language that doesn't require interpretation. Because the world is noisy, and noise changes your intention. When you keep your move quiet, you keep it close to the real reason you're doing it. You can be honest about the fear without advertising the fear. You can be imperfect without turning imperfection into humiliation. You can move in small steps without feeling like you owe anyone dramatic proof. You can adjust the plan without feeling like you failed, because nobody is keeping score except you. And that's where the move stays alive. Inside your routine, not inside a conversation. So if you're serious, treat your next move like something valuable, the way you'd treat cash in your pocket. You don't pull it out and count it in public. You don't show it to people who don't need to see it. You keep it close until it becomes something that can't be taken from you by a reaction, a doubt, a laugh, or an opinion. That's what it means to build in private. Not secrecy for ego. Privacy for survival. Because once the move becomes real, once it has roots, repetition, structure, you won't need to talk about it anyway. People will notice the difference without you narrating it. The cleanest transformations don't come with announcements. They come with presence. So ask yourself this, honestly, what are you still talking about that you should be doing quietly? And what would happen if, for the next month, you stopped explaining and simply built? Your private routine is your real biography. Not the story you tell about yourself, not your intentions, not the version of you that shows up when people are watching. Your biography, the honest one, is written in the quiet parts of your day. The first 10 minutes after you wake up, the way you handle boredom, the way you respond to discomfort, the choices you make when no one will ever applaud them, because words are cheap. Even your own words to yourself can be cheap. You can promise 100 times. You can swear you're about to change. You can think deeply about your future and still live the exact same day on repeat. The only thing that breaks that loop is routine, not as a rigid schedule, but as a pattern of self-respect that shows up whether you feel inspired or not. A lot of people live with a split identity. There's who they believe they are, and there's what their daily behavior proves. That gap creates tension. It's the tension that makes you feel guilty at night and restless in the morning. It's the tension that makes you reach for distractions, because distractions numb the discomfort of inconsistency. And if you don't close that gap, you end up living in a permanent state of almost disciplined, almost focused, almost healed, almost confident, always almost. Private routine closes the gap because it doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be consistent. That's why routine is your real biography. It tells the truth about what you worship. If you reach for your phone before you reach for your mind, it tells the truth. If you make time for everyone else but never for your body, it tells the truth. If you talk about growth but avoid the boring work that creates growth, it tells the truth. Your day is a confession, even when your mouth is silent. And this can feel harsh until you see how freeing it is. Because if your biography is written by routine, then you can rewrite your life without needing permission. You don't need a dramatic breakthrough. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to explain your new standards. You just need to change what you repeat. Most people chase identity through mood. They wait until they feel like the new person. They wait for confidence to arrive. They wait for motivation to hit. But mood is unreliable. It comes and goes like weather. Routine is what makes identity stable. It's what turns I want to be into I am, not through declaration, but through evidence. And the evidence becomes personal. It changes the way you trust yourself. When you keep a promise privately, when nobody knows you resisted the urge to scroll, nobody knows you trained even though you didn't feel like it. Nobody knows you did the work instead of talking about the work. Something inside you strengthens. It's not loud confidence. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling that your word means something, that you're not just a person who imagines a better life. You're a person who builds it, piece by piece. This is also why private routines feel boring to people who live for attention. Boring is the point. Boring means it's sustainable. Boring means it's not a performance. Boring means you're not depending on emotional fireworks to do what needs to be done. The strongest people usually aren't the most dramatic. They're the most consistent. They've trained themselves to do the right thing on ordinary days, which is why they can handle extraordinary days without falling apart. Seneca put it in a sentence that stings a little because it's true. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The imagination loves grand plans and future versions. Routine deals with reality. Routine deals with the sink full of dishes, the tired body, the distracted mind, the temptation to delay, the urge to reach for comfort. It's easy to be impressive in imagination. It's harder and more meaningful to be consistent in reality. And here's the key. Your routine doesn't have to be huge. A private biography isn't written with dramatic chapters. It's written with daily lines. A short walk when you don't want to move. A clean hour of focused work. A simple meal that respects your body. A decision to go to sleep instead of chasing one more hit of stimulation. A boundary you keep without announcing it. Small enough to repeat, serious enough to change you. Over time, those lines become a story, and the story becomes a life. That's why building in private isn't just about hiding goals. It's about aligning your life so tightly with your standards that you stop needing to convince anyone you're changing. Your routine becomes the proof. Your calm becomes the proof. Your discipline becomes the proof. The way you move through the day becomes the proof. So if you want a brutal, honest mirror, don't ask yourself who you are. Look at what you repeat when nobody is watching. That's your biography right now. And the best part is, you can start rewriting it today, quietly, without announcing anything, just by changing what happens next. Hidden discipline builds a kind of self-trust that attention cannot give. There's a specific confidence that doesn't come from being liked, and it doesn't come from being praised, and it doesn't even come from feeling ready. It comes from a quieter source, evidence you've collected in private, the kind of evidence nobody can take from you because nobody even knows it exists. Most people are trying to feel confident by changing the outside world. They want reassurance. They want someone to say, "I believe in you." They want recognition, a signal, a reaction that calms their doubt. And yes, encouragement can help. But it doesn't build the deepest kind of stability because it's borrowed. It depends on someone else staying consistent, staying supportive, staying present. The moment that support fades, the confidence fades with it. Self-trust is different. Self-trust is not an emotion. It's a relationship. And relationships are built through repetition, through reliability, through moments where you show up exactly when it would have been easy to disappear. That's why hidden discipline matters so much. When nobody is watching, there's no social reward, no applause, no reputation boost, no external pressure to keep it up. All you have is you, and that's where the real question shows up. Clean and uncomfortable. Do you do the work when it only benefits your future? When you say you're going to do something and you do it privately, you're teaching your nervous system a new rule. My word means something, not to the world. To me. And that sounds simple until you realize how many people don't trust themselves. They've promised themselves so many times and broken it so many times that their mind treats their own intentions like a joke. They say, "I'm going to change." And a deeper part of them responds, "Sure, like last time." That inner cynicism is brutal because it makes everything harder. It makes motivation feel fake. It makes goals feel embarrassing. It makes the future feel like a story you tell yourself to cope, not a reality you can build. Hidden discipline repairs that relationship the same way you repair trust with another person, with small, consistent proof. Not a huge transformation overnight, not a dramatic comeback that burns out, just quiet follow-through. You wake up and do the first part of the routine, even if it's imperfect. You keep a boundary, even if you feel guilty. You do the work, even if you feel uninspired. You don't reach for the old distraction, even when the urge is loud. You don't announce it. You don't turn it into a personality. You simply do it, then do it again. Over time, your mind stops arguing with your intentions because it has been trained by evidence. It starts to believe you. And that's where the real freedom begins, because once you trust yourself, you stop needing the world to constantly confirm you. You don't spiral when someone doesn't reply. You don't collapse when you're misunderstood. You don't chase reassurance the same way. Your inner stability becomes less dependent on external warmth because you have something stronger underneath it: reliability. This is one of the most Stoic ideas you can live, even if you never mention Stoicism. The Stoics weren't obsessed with being admired for discipline. They were obsessed with being governed from the inside. They wanted a life where the self isn't dragged around by impulses, by attention, by mood, by praise, by rejection. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as if he was training a soldier inside his own mind, not for a parade, but for the private battle of staying steady. That's what you're doing when you practice hidden discipline. You're training the part of you that stays loyal when nobody is watching. And what's interesting is how this changes your relationship with attention itself. Attention stops being a need. It becomes optional. You can enjoy it without being addicted to it. You can receive praise without depending on it. You can be seen without needing to be seen, because you've already built the core proof in silence. That proof also makes you harder to manipulate. People can't pull you around as easily with mixed signals because your center isn't up for negotiation. You stop treating approval like oxygen. You stop living like you need permission to feel okay. You become steadier in your decisions, not because life got easier, but because you became more reliable to yourself. And there's a quiet dignity in that. The dignity of being able to look in the mirror and know you're not just a person with good intentions. You're a person who follows through. That dignity changes the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you handle pressure. It makes you calmer, less needy, more selective, more patient. You stop rushing to prove yourself because you already know who you are becoming. So if you've been craving confidence, don't chase it in public, build it in private. Give yourself the only kind of reassurance that lasts: evidence. Because attention can make you feel good for a moment. Self-trust can hold you for a lifetime. A quiet season is not stagnation. It is controlled preparation. From the outside, it can look like nothing is happening. Less talking, less posting, less explaining, less showing your face. People might assume you fell off, lost motivation, got distracted, got lazy, disappeared. And if you're not careful, you can start believing their interpretation, because the human ego hates being unseen. It hates feeling like you're not moving. But a quiet season is often the most serious kind of movement, because it's movement without noise. It's the season where you stop chasing the dopamine of being acknowledged and start building the boring structure that actually changes your life. The season where you stop trying to look productive and start becoming consistent. The season where your progress isn't measured by reactions, but by repetitions. Controlled preparation means you're not rushing to be validated. You're not trying to be impressive while you're still unstable. You're not asking the world to clap for something that isn't finished. You're setting a pace you can survive. You're practicing the new identity until it becomes normal. And that takes time. People are noticing. But the deepest, people are noticing. But the deepest parts of transformation are invisible at first. They show up as internal shifts that don't look like much from the outside. You're sleeping earlier. You're cutting off distractions. You're training in silence. You're saving money. You're reading. You're regulating your mood. You're building a standard inside your day. Those things don't get applause. They don't go viral. But they're the foundation of everything that eventually becomes visible. This is why quiet seasons feel uncomfortable. They remove external feedback. They remove the quick reassurance that you're on track. They force you to build with faith and evidence instead of excitement. You don't get to borrow confidence from attention. You have to earn it through routine, and that earns something stronger than motivation: patience. Patience isn't passive. Patience is the ability to keep working while the results are still hidden. It's the ability to tolerate the nothing is happening feeling without quitting. It's the ability to keep repeating the right actions while your mind is screaming for proof. That's controlled preparation. You're not waiting. You're training your nervous system to handle delayed gratification, to stay loyal to the process without needing constant confirmation. Stoicism respects this deeply because it understands that most of life is not under your control. You don't control timing. You don't control other people's recognition. You don't control how fast the world responds. What you control is your own standard, your own effort, your own practice. A quiet season is where you stop arguing with reality and start aligning with what actually works. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter." That's not a cute quote. That's a survival strategy for long transformations. It means keep your actions clean even when your emotions are impatient. Keep your routine intact even when nobody notices. Keep training your character even when your life hasn't caught up yet. Because what people call winning in public is usually the final chapter of a very quiet book. The version of you that becomes undeniable later is built through invisible days. Days where you did the work and nothing dramatic happened. Days where you stayed consistent and still felt behind. Days where you chose discipline and still didn't feel confident. Days where you kept going without applause. Those days aren't exciting, but they are sacred, because they're where your identity becomes real. And once identity becomes real, results become inevitable. This is also why you need to stop letting other people's timeline pressure you. If someone's progress looks faster, you might assume you're late, but you don't know what they sacrificed. You don't know what they skipped. You don't know what they're faking. You don't know what their foundation looks like. Controlled preparation means you're building a foundation you can live on, not a tower that impresses people and collapses under stress. So if you're in a quiet season, don't rush to make it visible just to calm your ego. Don't post proof just to feel real. Don't announce your progress just to get a dopamine hit. Let the quiet do its job. Use the quiet to build things that last. Skill, health, discipline, self-trust, boundaries, emotional independence. Let it look slow. Let it look boring. Let it look like nothing. Because if you keep going, one day it won't look like nothing anymore. It'll look like you. Protect your goals from premature judgment. Most people don't know how to look at something unfinished without trying to name it. They hear an idea and they rush to categorize it. Smart, stupid, realistic, impossible, because labeling feels like control. It makes them feel safe. And if your goal is still in its fragile stage, that judgment doesn't land as feedback. It lands like contamination. It doesn't sharpen you. It distracts you. It pulls you into defending the plan instead of building the plan. The tricky part is that premature judgment rarely arrives as open hostility. It tends to wear a friendly mask. Someone smiles and says, "Just be careful." Someone laughs and calls it a phase. Someone asks questions that sound supportive, but the real tone underneath is a test. Are you really serious, or are you just excited again? And even when they mean well, they don't feel what you feel. They don't carry your reasons. They don't know what this goal costs you emotionally. They only see the surface and respond with the limits of their own experience. That's why people often react to your future as if it's about them. Your ambition can trigger their insecurity. Your discipline can highlight their inconsistency. Your silence can make their noise look obvious. So the fastest way for them to calm that discomfort is to shrink what you're building. They don't always know they're doing it. It's often automatic. But it still affects you if you're still in the early stage where your confidence is being built day by day, repetition by repetition. And this is where most people lose their momentum. They don't lose it because the goal was too hard. They lose it because they invited too many voices into a process that needed clean air. The plan becomes a conversation. The conversation becomes a debate. The debate becomes emotional. Then you start leaking energy, explaining, justifying, proving, trying to sound certain so you don't look naive. You end up doing PR for a life you haven't built yet, and the work gets postponed while the talking takes over. Stoicism has a simple answer to this without turning you bitter. Protect what's in your control. Other people's reactions aren't. Your exposure is. Your attention is. Your standards are. Marcus Aurelius keeps circling the same point in different ways. Guard the mind, because once the mind is invaded by noise, your actions get weaker. In this context, your goal is part of your mind. It's part of your future. So you treat it like something valuable, not to hide in fear, but to stay focused long enough for the roots to hold. There's a difference between feedback and premature judgment. Feedback is useful when you have structure, when you're already moving, already showing up, already collecting data from your own behavior. Premature judgment hits before you've even built stability, so it mostly becomes emotional weight. It makes you rush. It makes you doubt your timing. It makes you either over-explain or overcompensate. Either way, you're no longer calm, and calm is where consistency lives. So the real move is selective access. Not everybody earns a seat in the room where your future is being built. Some people don't deserve the draft version of you. They only know how to respect the finished version, so giving them early access isn't bravery. It's unnecessary risk. Protecting your goal might mean keeping it between you and your routine for a while. It might mean sharing it with one person who's proven they don't poison what's still forming. It might mean letting your progress stay invisible until it becomes undeniable, not for drama, but for survival. Because the goal isn't to be secretive. The goal is to stay clean. Clean focus, clean effort, clean repetition. A life that isn't constantly interrupted by the need to explain itself. And here's the calm truth. The right people won't punish you for being private. The wrong people will. That reaction alone is information. The moment you stop feeding your process to doubtful minds, your energy stops splitting. You stop doing the emotional labor of defending something that should be built, not debated. Your work gets lighter, not because it became easy, but because you removed the noise that was never helping. So if you've had goals die before, don't only blame motivation. Look at access. Look at who got a front row seat too early. Look at how quickly your dream turned into a conversation. Then do something simple this time. Keep building until the structure is strong enough to stand in public without needing protection. And sit with this question for a second, because it reveals a lot. Who has been allowed to touch your goals before they earned the right? And what would change if you kept the next chapter private until it's real? The need to announce progress can become a hidden addiction. It doesn't feel like an addiction because it looks productive on the surface. It looks like confidence, like accountability, like you're finally taking your life seriously. You share a new routine. You hint at a new chapter. You post a quote that matches your mood. You let people know you're locked in. And for a moment it feels good, clean even, like you've drawn a line in the sand. But notice what happens right after. Your brain gets a reward before the work has a chance to mature. A small wave of relief arrives, not because you've changed, but because you've been seen trying to change. And that feeling is powerful. It calms the discomfort that normally pushes you into real action. It gives you the emotional payoff early, which means the boring part, the only part that actually builds results, now has to compete with a shortcut. This is where the addiction hides. You start craving the feeling of progress more than the reality of progress. You can feel it in how quickly the mind moves toward visibility. You haven't even built a full week of consistency, and you already want to talk about it. You haven't even stabilized the habit, and you already want recognition for the intention. You haven't even survived the first hard day, and you already want the identity badge. Because visibility feels like proof. It feels like you're becoming someone new. But the truth is, visibility can become a substitute for discipline. A substitute is dangerous because it doesn't look like the enemy. It looks like support, like momentum, like confidence. So you keep doing it. You keep narrating. You keep announcing. You keep updating people on a process that should still be quiet. And slowly, without realizing it, the goal shifts. The goal stops being transformation and becomes maintenance of an image. The image of being driven, the image of being disciplined, the image of being the person who is improving. That image is expensive. It costs you honesty, because the moment you make progress public, you start editing reality. You start wanting to report wins, not struggle. You start curating. You start avoiding the truth on rough days because you don't want to look inconsistent. And inconsistency is normal. It's part of training, but public eyes make it feel like failure. So instead of returning to the work calmly after a bad day, you feel shame. You feel exposed. You feel like the story you told is now in danger, and the easiest way to protect the story is to avoid the work entirely until you can come back with something impressive again. That's how people fall into a cycle of performance growth. They're always starting, always coming back, always resetting. Plenty of announcements, very little deep change. The irony is that many people believe they're sharing because they want accountability. But real accountability is quiet. It's usually one trusted person, one honest agreement, one steady check-in that protects your process rather than turning it into content. The addiction we're talking about here is different. It's the need for immediate reflection from the world, the need to feel real through being perceived. And that need is understandable. Being human means wanting to be seen, wanting encouragement, wanting someone to witness your effort. There's nothing wrong with that. The danger begins when being seen becomes your fuel. Because if attention is your fuel, then the work dies the moment attention disappears. That's why the private season matters. In private, you don't get to confuse applause with progress. You don't get to borrow confidence from reactions. You don't get to trade the discomfort of repetition for the comfort of being recognized. You have to face the raw question, do I still show up when the only reward is self-respect? More than other people, but care more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. That line stings because it exposes the trade. We abandon our own standards just to keep the room warm. We chase the feeling of being approved of, even if it costs us the future we said we wanted. So the move isn't to disappear out of bitterness. It's to disappear out of seriousness. To let your progress become quiet enough that it can't be interrupted. To make the work so private that it becomes honest again. To build without needing to be witnessed. Because once you stop feeding the need to announce, your energy returns to you. Your focus becomes clean. You start liking the process for what it is, not for how it looks. Your identity shifts from "I'm trying" to "I do this." And that shift is subtle, but it's everything. It's the difference between a person who needs motivation and a person who has a standard. And when you live from a standard, you stop craving the early reward. You stop needing the little dopamine hits to keep going. You start trusting delayed proof. You start enjoying the quiet competence that grows when nobody is watching. So here's a question worth asking yourself before you share anything about your next chapter. Are you announcing progress because you're building, or because you want to feel built? Winning publicly requires surviving privately. What people call overnight success is usually just the first time the world finally noticed a grind that's been happening in silence for months, sometimes years. The public sees the moment you win. They don't see the nights you wanted to quit and didn't. They don't see the mornings you felt uninspired and still showed up. They don't see the private negotiations you had with yourself, the ones nobody can clap for because nobody even knows they happened. That's the part most people underestimate. They think winning is a visible event, like a finish line you cross in front of an audience. In reality, winning is a long season of not being seen while you do the same thing again and again. It's lonely repetition. It's boring consistency. It's choosing the work even when it doesn't feel meaningful yet. It's taking action when the results are still hidden, when you can't prove to anyone that it's working, when even you start wondering if you're wasting your time. Where nobody understands what you're building, the phase where people might assume you're falling off, the phase where your ego doesn't get fed, the phase where your motivation stops being loud and your discipline has to carry you on its back. There's a specific kind of pressure that only exists in private, the pressure of having no audience to perform for. It forces honesty. If you show up in private, it means you actually want it. If you only show up when the room is watching, it means you wanted the image more than the outcome. That's not an insult. It's a mirror. And a lot of people don't like that mirror, so they avoid it by staying visible, posting, announcing, talking, hinting, anything that feels like movement without demanding true survival. Private survival is different. It's showing up when you're tired and you can't blame anyone. It's staying consistent when nobody is asking, when nobody is impressed, when the day feels ordinary and the temptation to drift is strong. It's resisting the urge to turn your struggle into a story, resisting the urge to refresh your phone for emotional comfort, resisting the urge to seek reassurance instead of earning reassurance through action. This is why the private phase is where your character gets built, not just your results. Validation. A person who can handle slow validation. A person who can handle slow progress without losing faith. A person who can take a hit and keep moving without rewriting their entire identity every time life gets hard. The world rewards what's visible, sure, but what becomes visible is usually just the surface of a deeper foundation. When that foundation is weak, public attention becomes dangerous. You start getting praise, and the praise inflates you before you're stable. You start getting criticism, and the criticism wounds you because you haven't built inner proof yet. You start being watched, and now every mistake feels expensive. That's how people collapse right after they make it. They reached visibility before they earned stability. So surviving privately is what makes public winning sustainable. It teaches you how to keep going without external fuel. It makes you familiar with discomfort. It gives you a relationship with your own word. And once you have that, success becomes less of a miracle and more of a predictable outcome. Not because the world becomes easy, but because your internal structure becomes stronger than your excuses. Marcus Aurelius had a line that fits this perfectly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That's not just philosophy. That's the private phase in one sentence. The loneliness becomes training. The boredom becomes training. The slow progress becomes training. The doubt becomes training. The lack of applause becomes training. Everything you thought was blocking you becomes the thing that strengthens you if you stop trying to escape it and start using it. And there's a calm confidence that comes from that kind of survival. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't chase respect. It doesn't beg for attention. It moves with patience because it knows something the public doesn't. The win already started a long time ago, back when nobody cared. So if you're in that private season right now, don't rush it. Don't force it to look impressive. Don't try to make people understand what you're building. Let them misunderstand you while you work. Let the silence protect your focus. Let the routine protect your identity. Keep stacking the boring days. Keep showing up even when it feels like nothing is changing, because that's usually the exact moment the foundation is being poured. Public winning is loud. Private survival is sacred. And the people who end up undeniable are usually the ones who learned how to keep going when it felt like nobody would ever notice. The strongest identity shifts happen before your life looks different. That's the part that frustrates people, because the internal change arrives first, and the world doesn't reward internal change. It doesn't even notice it. You can be transforming in the most serious way and still look the same from the outside. Same schedule, same face, same job, same environment, same people assuming you're still the version of you they're used to. And that gap between who you're becoming and what your life still looks like can feel like a kind of loneliness. It can make you wonder if anything is happening. It can make you impatient. It can tempt you to force results early, to rush visibility, to announce progress, just so the outside world mirrors what you feel inside. But that's usually where people sabotage the process, because the early phase isn't meant to be impressive. It's meant to be stable. Real identity shifts start with standards, not big speeches, not public vows, not new year, new me energy. It starts with you quietly raising the bar in small, non-negotiable ways. You begin to feel disgust toward certain habits you used to accept as normal. You stop entertaining distractions that used to feel harmless. You stop bargaining with yourself as much. You start noticing how often you used to abandon your own priorities just to keep your emotions comfortable. And without making a big deal out of it, you start refusing. You refuse to scroll the way you used to scroll. You refuse to eat the way you used to eat. You refuse to talk the way you used to talk about yourself. You refuse to keep giving your attention away for free. That's an identity shift. And nobody sees it at first, because it's happening in decisions so small, they don't look like progress. They look like nothing. But nothing repeated is exactly what becomes a new self. This is why the strongest shifts happen before the life looks different. The life looks different later. The life is the echo. Identity is the source. You can feel the source changing long before the echo shows up. Your mornings become calmer, not because your problems vanished, but because you stopped starting the day by feeding chaos. Your room gets cleaner, not because you became a different person overnight, but because you stopped tolerating a messy environment that keeps your mind scattered. Your boundaries get sharper, not because you became mean, but because you finally noticed the cost of being endlessly available. Your routine gets quieter, not because you lost your personality, but because you stopped needing to broadcast your direction for it to feel real. And one of the most important internal shifts is how you handle discomfort. The old version of you treated discomfort like a signal to escape. You reached for dopamine. You reached for conversation. You reached for reassurance. You reached for anything that would soften the moment. The new version of you starts treating discomfort differently. It becomes information. It becomes training. It becomes the space where your future is built. That's a deep identity change, because it means you stop being driven by mood. You're still human, you still feel, but your feelings stop being the manager. That's why the outside world can stay the same, while your inner life becomes completely different. You might still have the same job, but you're working with a different mind now. You might still be around the same people, but you're not available to the same dynamics. You might still have the same challenges, but your response is cleaner, less reactive, less desperate. This phase is also where you become more comfortable being misunderstood. Not in an arrogant way, in a grounded way. Because once your identity starts shifting internally, you realize something. People are always late to your transformation. They can only recognize you after the results arrive. Before that, they keep talking to the old version of you. And if you're not careful, you'll start replying as the old version just to avoid friction. That's the test. Can you stay loyal to who you're becoming even when nobody sees it yet? Can you keep your standards even when the world doesn't reward them immediately? Can you keep building with no visible proof? The Stoics understood this quietly. They didn't treat virtue as a performance. They treated it as an internal alignment. Marcus Aurelius didn't write to impress anyone. He wrote to train his mind. That's what you're doing in this stage. You're training yourself to live from your own standard, not from the room's approval. And the payoff is subtle at first. It feels like self-respect returning. It feels like your attention coming home. It feels like fewer internal arguments. It feels like a calm that isn't dependent on good news. It feels like you're becoming someone you can rely on. Then one day, later than you want, but right on time, the life starts catching up. Your body shows it, your work shows it, your money shows it, your relationships show it, your presence shows it. People call it a glow-up or a comeback, like it happened suddenly, but you'll know the truth. The strongest identity shifts happened long before your life looked different. So don't rush the echo. Protect the source. And if you're in that quiet stage right now, let this question sit with you. If nobody could see your progress for a while, would you still keep your standards? Just because you respect who you're becoming? Move quietly enough that your actions stay ahead of your image. Because the moment your image grows faster than your substance, you create pressure you haven't earned the strength to carry. People start expecting a version of you that hasn't stabilized yet. You start expecting it too. And that expectation can break you. Not because you're incapable, but because you built the spotlight before you built the foundation. It's easy to inflate the image of progress. You can talk about discipline. You can post grind energy. You can sound confident. You can hint at big changes. You can collect reactions that make you feel like the new identity is already real. And for a while, that feels like momentum. But it's not. It's friction, because now you're dragging a public version of yourself behind you, trying to keep up with it. You go to sleep instead of chasing. You go to sleep instead of chasing distraction. It's the decisions that don't look impressive, but make your life stronger. Substance doesn't need to announce itself because it's not trying to be seen. It's trying to be stable. Image, on the other hand, is hungry. It wants a reaction. It wants proof. It wants to be recognized. And if you feed that hunger too early, you start changing your behavior to protect how you're perceived instead of improving who you are. That's when collapse becomes easy. Collapse doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like quiet quitting. You stop showing up. You stop doing the work. You take a break that never ends. Or you keep working, but now it's driven by anxiety, not discipline. You're no longer building, you're maintaining the appearance of building. And that is exhausting. So the clean strategy is simple. Keep your actions ahead. Let the work accumulate before you let the world assign you an identity. Let your routine become real before you let it become a story. Let your discipline become normal before you let it become visible. Because when substance leads, image becomes harmless. Attention can't destabilize you because you're already stable. Praise can't inflate you because you're grounded in evidence. Criticism can't break you because you've already lived through the hardest part in private. This is why the most intimidating people are often the quietest. They're not quiet as a gimmick. They're quiet because they don't need to talk. Their actions are already ahead. Their life is already moving. They don't require permission to be serious. Stoicism respects that kind of quiet strength because it's rooted in self-governance. It's not dependent on the room. It doesn't need applause to stay disciplined. It doesn't need attention to feel real. Marcus Aurelius kept repeating the same calm reminder to himself. Do the work of the present moment. Don't chase the noise. That's how you keep actions ahead of image, by committing to the next right thing and refusing to turn it into a performance. And if you think about it, keeping actions ahead also protects your peace. When your image is ahead, you start living in self-consciousness. You feel watched. You feel pressure to always be on. You feel like every slip is public. You start editing your life for perception. But when your actions are ahead, you can be human again. You can have messy days without turning them into shame. You can adjust without needing to explain. You can take setbacks without losing your identity, because your identity isn't built on the spotlight. So move quietly, not to surprise anyone, but to protect the sequence. Build first. Let the proof arrive late. Let the transformation be private until it's stable enough to stand under attention. Because when your actions stay ahead of your image, you don't need to sell yourself. You don't need to announce yourself. You don't need to convince anyone. Your life does the talking. Keep your process sacred. Because once you let everyone touch what you're building, it stops feeling like yours. It turns into something you have to manage, something you have to explain, something you have to defend. The work becomes noisy. Your mind becomes crowded, and the quiet, intimate relationship you were forming with your future gets interrupted by other people's interpretations. Sacred doesn't mean dramatic. It means protected. It means there are parts of your life that are not up for discussion while they're still forming. Parts you don't turn into updates. Parts you don't translate for people. Parts you don't drag into debates just to prove you're serious. You're not hiding because you're insecure. You're guarding because you're committed. A sacred process stays clean. It stays simple. It stays close to the real reason you started. The moment you start giving weekly reports to the world, the process changes. You begin to chase measurable proof too early because you want to show progress. You begin to rush results because you don't want to look like you're stuck. You begin to choose what looks impressive over what builds slowly. And even when no one is judging you openly, your own mind starts doing the judging because you created an audience inside your head. This is why some people have the same goal for years and never reach it. They don't fail from lack of information. They fail from too much exposure, too many voices, too many opinions, too much explaining, too much outside access to an inside process. Stoicism teaches a different kind of strength. Strength that doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't ask you to prove your discipline to anyone. It asks you to live it, quietly, repeatedly, with a kind of patience that can tolerate being misunderstood. A sacred process protects that patience. It lets you have ugly days without turning them into public failure. It lets you adjust without feeling like you broke a promise to the world. It lets you move at the speed that's actually sustainable. It keeps your motivation connected to your values, not to reactions. And it also keeps your ego out of the driver's seat, because ego loves to perform. Ego loves to announce. Ego loves to make the goal part of the identity before the identity is earned. But a sacred process forces humility. It forces you to show up when nobody cares. It forces you to build without applause. It forces you to keep your word to yourself without needing anyone to know. There's a quiet kind of integrity that grows out of that. The integrity of having something in your life that isn't for display. Something that's yours. Something you do because you respect yourself, not because you want people to see you respecting yourself. And once you have that, you start understanding why privacy feels so powerful. Privacy removes performance. It removes the urge to curate. It removes the need to look good while you're still becoming. It gives you room to be a beginner. Room to be inconsistent at first. Room to get better in peace. This is also where you learn a hard social truth. Not everyone deserves access to what you're building. Some people will misunderstand your silence. Some will mock it. Some will try to pull you back into the old version of you because the new version makes them uncomfortable. And if your process isn't sacred, you'll keep letting those voices interfere. You'll keep explaining, proving, debating, draining yourself. But when your process becomes sacred, you stop negotiating. You don't announce your growth. You don't ask for permission to focus. You don't explain every boundary. You just build. Then, one day later, when the results arrive, people call it sudden. They call it luck. They call it a glow-up. They call it out of nowhere. And you'll know the truth. It wasn't out of nowhere. It was out of quiet. So keep your process sacred, not forever. Just long enough for it to become real. Long enough for it to become stable, long enough for your actions to carry the weight, so your words don't have to. Delayed proof carries more weight than early promises. Early promises are easy because they cost almost nothing in the moment. You can say you're changing while still living the same day. You can announce a new chapter while your habits are still loyal to the old one. You can talk about discipline while your life is still built around mood. And the dangerous part is that a promise can feel like progress, especially when people respond to it, especially when you get that little hit of, finally, this is me now. But a promise is just sound. Proof is substance, and substance takes time. That's why delayed proof hits differently. It doesn't need a speech. It doesn't ask for belief. It doesn't beg to be taken seriously. It arrives with weight because it's backed by repetition that happened when nobody was watching, when nobody was encouraging you, when you had to carry your own momentum without turning it into content. You can feel the difference in how people respond, too. Make some noise and then disappear. Proof makes some noise and then disappear. Proof doesn't disappear as easily because it changes what you are. It changes your posture, your energy, your standards, your output, your decisions. It becomes visible in ways you can't fake for long. There's also something humbling about delayed proof. It forces you to sit in a season where you don't get to cash out early. You don't get to collect praise just for intention. You don't get to borrow confidence from being seen. You have to live through the quiet days where nothing dramatic happens, just the same routine again, the same commitment again, the same internal battle again. That's where most people get restless. They start chasing quick validation because the slow path feels like it's not working. But slow is often the whole point. Because the goal isn't to look changed. The goal is to become stable. Early promises tend to create a kind of pressure that makes people rush. They start demanding results too soon, not because they're impatient with the goal, but because they're impatient with how they're perceived. They want the outside world to match the story they just told. They want their image to stay consistent, so they push too hard, burn too fast, then crash. Then they need another promise to cover the crash. That loop is exhausting. Delayed proof breaks the loop. It keeps your ego out of the driver's seat. It keeps your focus on what actually compounds, habits that can survive boring weeks, standards that don't collapse under stress, routines that still show up on low-energy days. It turns your comeback into something quiet and inevitable instead of dramatic and fragile. And there's a private benefit that matters more than the public one. Delayed proof makes you trust yourself again. Not the "I feel confident today" kind of trust. The deeper kind. The kind that comes from watching yourself do the work without witnesses, without applause, without a backup plan, without needing anyone to validate the effort. When you stack enough of that, you stop needing to convince yourself that you're serious. You already know. Your life has receipts. That's why disappearing to build is such a powerful move. Not as a tactic to impress people later, forget them for a second, but because disappearing removes the temptation to perform. It forces you into a clean relationship with the work. Either you do it or you don't. Either you keep your word or you don't. No one is there to rescue your ego with compliments. No one is there to distract you with opinions. It's just you and the standard. Then the day comes when you return, still quiet, still grounded, and people feel the difference before you explain anything. They might ask what happened. They might say you seem different. They might call it sudden. And you'll know it wasn't sudden at all. It was delayed proof finally surfacing. This is also why delayed proof has more authority than early promises. It doesn't demand trust. It creates it. A promise tries to pull belief forward in time. Proof brings reality into the present. So if you're building right now, resist the urge to keep announcing. Let the work stay silent long enough to mature. Let the progress become real before it becomes visible. Let the proof arrive late, because late proof carries weight. And here's the question that makes this practical. If nobody could hear your promises, if no one could clap, react, or encourage you, what would you still be willing to prove with your daily actions? Private effort removes the temptation to perform progress. There's a strange thing that happens when nobody is watching you. You stop lying to yourself, not in a dramatic moral way, more in a practical way. The excuses don't sound convincing anymore. The "I'm doing my best" story loses its comfort if the day ends and nothing real was done. And the opposite is true too. Small wins start feeling bigger because you earned them without witnesses, without a camera, without a reaction to soften the discomfort. Public progress is seductive because it gives you an easy substitute. You can look like you're moving without actually moving. You can talk about discipline while your habits stay unchanged. You can collect the identity before you earn it. The mind loves that shortcut. It feels like relief. It feels like control. It feels like you're not stuck anymore. But the shortcut has a cost. It trains you to crave the appearance of growth more than the work that creates growth. To explain it, how to make it sound to explain it, how to make it sound impressive, how to prove to someone, maybe even to yourself, that you're serious. And once you do that, your energy splits. Half of you is trying to build, the other half is trying to be seen building. That split is where most people burn out. Private effort removes the split. It forces a clean relationship with the truth. Either you showed up or you didn't. Either you did the work or you performed the idea of the work. Either the routine happened or it didn't. No one is there to reward your intention. No one is there to applaud your plans. That can feel harsh at first, especially if you're used to external validation as fuel, but it becomes the strongest kind of freedom because it brings you back to reality, and reality is where results are built. You also learn something uncomfortable. Sometimes you don't actually want the result as much as you want the identity that comes with saying you're chasing it. The dream feels good to talk about. The work feels heavy to do. And when nobody's watching, that difference becomes impossible to hide from. You can't dress it up. You can't post through it. You can't hype yourself out of it. You have to face it plainly. That moment of honesty is a gift, because once you see the truth, you can make a real choice. If you want the result, you accept the price. If you don't, you stop pretending, and you stop wasting emotional energy on a story that never becomes a life. Either way, you get clean. Comes from watching yourself show up. When comes from watching yourself show up, when the day is boring, when you're tired, when you're not in the mood, when there's no dramatic payoff. That's not just discipline, it's self-respect turning into habit. The Stoics understood this without needing modern language for it. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." The second half is the private part. Do what you have to do is rarely photogenic. It's repetition, it's restraint, it's saying no to easy comfort, it's choosing the long-term life over the short-term feeling. That's where the temptation to perform dies, because performance doesn't survive boredom. Only commitment does. And there's something else private effort gives you that public motivation can't. It removes the pressure to be perfect. When you're building in public, every imperfect day feels like a reputation problem. You start thinking in terms of streaks, optics, consistency you can display. Miss a day, and it feels like failure. In private, you can be human. You can miss and return without shame. You can adjust without explaining. You can learn without announcing. The work stays simple, and simplicity is what makes habits sustainable. Over time, the need to be seen starts fading. The craving for proof shifts inward. You begin to want quiet evidence more than public approval. That's when your progress becomes real, because it's no longer competing with a second goal, being perceived a certain way. You're not building a brand, you're building a life. So if you've felt stuck, consider this. Maybe you've been trying to make your progress visible too early. Maybe you've been feeding the performance and starving the practice. The solution isn't more hype, it's less audience. A smaller circle, fewer updates, more repetition, more silence. And if you're willing to test it, here's a clean experiment. Take one goal and make it invisible for 30 days. No announcements, no "I'm starting", no hints, no progress reports. Just quiet action, daily, imperfect, real. Let the only reward be self-trust. Because once you can build without performing, you don't just get results, you get freedom. Let people misunderstand you while you build. This is one of the hardest parts of the quiet season, not because the work is heavy, but because the silence invites stories. When you stop explaining yourself, people fill the gap with whatever is already in their mind. They assume you're mad. They assume you're arrogant. They assume you're falling off. They assume you're broke. They assume you're hiding something. They assume you think you're better. They assume you're trying to prove a point. And if you're the kind of person who cares about being seen correctly, that misunderstanding can feel like an itch you have to scratch. So you start wanting to clarify. You start wanting to fix the narrative. You start writing messages in your head. You start rehearsing what you'll say if they ask. You start feeling guilty for being quiet, as if focus is something you owe the world an apology for. But here's the truth. Trying to manage how everyone interprets you is a full-time job, and it pays you in stress. When you're building privately, your energy is supposed to go into repetition, into discipline, into strengthening the foundation. The moment you begin explaining your silence, your focus gets pulled outward again. Your plan turns into a debate. Your boundary turns into a negotiation. Your growth turns into a performance. And the worst part is that explanation rarely works the way you want it to, because people don't hear explanations neutrally. They hear them through their own emotions, their own insecurities, their own need to be right about you. So you end up working twice, building the life and defending the life. That's too expensive. Walks in during that phase and judges the walks in during that phase and judges the mess. It doesn't mean the final structure will be messy. It means they arrived too early. And if you start rearranging the project to satisfy the judgment of early visitors, you delay the building itself. The same thing happens with identity change. In the beginning, you don't look different yet. Your results aren't visible. Your calm hasn't fully stabilized. Your habits are still being trained. And because people can't see the internal shift, they assume nothing is happening, or they assume the worst. They might interpret your quiet as rejection. They might interpret your distance as weakness. They might interpret your focus as selfishness. And the temptation is to rush into their misunderstanding like a firefighter, trying to put out a fire that doesn't actually matter. But the fire is the distraction. Stoicism offers a clean way to move through this without becoming cold. It doesn't tell you to hate opinions. It tells you not to become governed by them. Epictetus has a line that fits perfectly here. When someone speaks ill of you, don't defend yourself. Just answer with your life. The spirit of it is simple. A person committed to building doesn't waste their best energy trying to correct every rumor in the air. They let time and behavior do what words can't, because words can be twisted. Consistency can't. When you keep working quietly, misunderstandings start losing power. They become background noise instead of a personal emergency. You stop needing to be interpreted correctly by everyone because you start being led by something stronger than their opinion. Your standard. Your day has a direction. Your routine has weight. Your attention belongs to the future you're building, not to the commentary around it. And this is where a surprising strength appears, emotional independence in social form. You learn how to let people be wrong about you without collapsing. You learn how to let silence exist without filling it with explanations. You learn how to let someone feel whatever they feel without rushing to soothe it. That's not cruelty. That's boundaries. That's maturity. And it's also protection for the unfinished version of you. Because early on, your discipline is still sensitive. If you get pulled into drama, you might lose the rhythm. If you get pulled into proving, you might start performing again. If you get pulled into defending your focus, you might start leaking energy back into the very dynamics you're trying to outgrow. So you accept something that feels uncomfortable at first. Being misunderstood is part of the price of building in private. Not forever, just for a while. Long enough for the results to arrive. Long enough for the new identity to become stable. Long enough for your life to speak in a way that makes explanation unnecessary. And when that moment comes, the same people who misread your silence will pretend they always knew you were capable. That's how it goes. Don't take it personally. Don't even take it seriously. Just keep building. So let them misunderstand your distance. Let them mislabel your quiet. Let them guess wrong about your focus. You're not living to be correctly perceived in the middle of the process. You're living to become undeniable at the end of it. The cleanest victory is the one that arrives without announcement. There's a certain kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from people cheering. It comes from the silence before they ever had a reason to cheer. It comes from the months where nobody knew what you were doing, where your name wasn't being mentioned, where your progress wasn't being tracked, where your effort didn't get translated into compliments or "I knew you could do it." It was just you, showing up in private, stacking days that looked ordinary on the outside and felt like a war on the inside. That kind of victory lands differently, because it isn't built on hype, it isn't built on storytelling, it isn't built on trying to look disciplined. It's built on becoming disciplined, so quietly that even you don't notice the exact moment it clicks. One day you wake up and you realize you're not negotiating as much. You're not begging yourself for motivation. You're not living in reaction. You're just doing what you said you'd do. The work became normal. The new self stopped being an idea and turned into a default. Public victories can be loud, but they can also be fragile. They rely on momentum that often comes from attention. Attention adds energy at first, but it also adds pressure, and pressure invites performance, and performance invites collapse. The cleanest victories avoid that entire trap by staying invisible long enough to be real. That's why disappearing for a while isn't losing. It's often the smartest form of preparation. Not everyone understands this, because the modern world trains you to narrate your life as you live it, to share the plan while it's still forming, to post the intention while the habit is still unstable, to turn the process into a public identity before it's earned. And the reward for that is immediate. People react, you feel seen, your brain relaxes, and for a moment it feels like progress. But quiet victory asks for a different kind of strength, delayed gratification. It asks you to do the work without a mirror. It asks you to keep your standards high, even when nobody validates them. It asks you to build a life that doesn't depend on being constantly reflected back to you by other people's attention. And this is where you become dangerous, in the healthiest possible way, because you stop being easy to distract. You stop being easy to pull off course with opinions. You stop needing to win the moment socially so you can win the season privately. There's also something pure about arriving without announcement. It protects your mind from bitterness. If you're building your comeback mainly to prove people wrong, you're still tied to them. They're still in the driver's seat. Their doubt is still your fuel. And that fuel burns hot, but it burns dirty. It makes you restless. It makes you impatient. It keeps you emotionally attached to the past. Quiet victory has a cleaner fuel, self-respect. You're not training to impress. You're training to be stable. You're not building to get revenge. You're building to get free. You're not working so they finally understand you. You're working so you no longer need them to. Seneca said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." That line is often used like a cliché, but in this context it's almost literal. The opportunity everyone calls sudden usually lands on the person who built quietly for so long that when the door finally opened, they were already ready. They didn't need to scramble. They didn't need to announce. They just stepped through it with calm, because the foundation existed before the spotlight arrived. And here's the secret most people miss. The quiet season is the victory already happening. The public win is just the receipt. So if you're still in the invisible part, don't rush it. Don't try to make it look impressive too early. Don't trade long-term proof for short-term applause. Let your work stay small enough to repeat. Let your progress stay quiet enough to survive. Let your actions stay ahead long enough that, by the time people notice, there's nothing left to debate. It's already real. Because the cleanest victory doesn't need a speech. It doesn't need a post. It doesn't even need an explanation. It arrives, calmly, as a fact. And I'll leave you with a question that's worth sitting with tonight, especially if you've been tempted to announce your next chapter too early. If nobody could witness your progress for the next 6 months, no reactions, no praise, no accountability theater, what would you still be willing to build just so your future self can finally breathe? Before we end, I just want to thank you for spending this time with me, because choosing silence in a world that rewards noise is not a small decision. It's a serious one. It means you're willing to do the work without applause. It means you're willing to protect your unfinished self. It means you're willing to let people misunderstand you for a while, just so your future can finally have room to grow. And if this episode landed with you, don't let it stay as a nice idea. Let it become a quiet action. One decision today that nobody sees. One habit you repeat tomorrow without announcing it. One boundary you hold without explaining. That's how the private season becomes real. And that's how the public win stops being a fantasy and starts being inevitable. If you enjoyed this, help me out. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs permission to stop performing and start building. And I'd love to hear from you. What's one goal you're going to keep private while you build it? Drop it in the comments. No details, no full plan, just the direction. And if you want, come back later and tell us what changed. Thank you for listening, and remember, disappear to build, return with proof.